When submitting a research manuscript, it is important to review your writing for any grammatical or formatting errors. Pages 144 to 146 of Doing Developmental Research provide a checklist for submitting your papers to your mentors and to journals. This checklist walks you through common mistakes made when submitting research manuscripts, both in content and in formatting. The checklist begins with 2 reminders to consider for the overall paper. First, I checked the manuscript guidelines for the journal to which I plan to send my paper. Second, I read 2 to 3 papers previously published in this journal, which gave me a sense of the correct formatting and structure to use for my paper. Next, the checklist walks you through some considerations for editing, which reads as follows. I removed all unnecessary words and phrases for my manuscript. Once I finished writing the paper, I put it away for 1 to 2 days before reading it for errors. I also read it again for clarity before sending it to my collaborators and/or mentor. I carefully reread the manuscript at least 2 to 3 times, looking for typos and errors. I played devil's advocate, looking for any errors, possible compounds, and logical gaps in my manuscript. I tried to explain any issues still outstanding and back up my views with documentation. I looked for ways to make transitions within the manuscript smooth and logical. I confirmed that all my sentences were no longer than 2 lines, especially for a non-native audience. I kept terms in my paper as consistent as possible. For example, I avoided writing that baby saw an object, baby saw the puppet, baby saw the stimulus, baby saw it. I avoided using acronyms unnecessarily, which helped the paper flow. I read the paper aloud 2 to 3 times, which helped me to hear how it flowed, especially for non-native readers. I arranged to have a couple of non-experts read the paper and confirm that they understood it. I had at least 2 native speakers of the language I'm using in the paper confirm its grammatical correctness. I used active verbs and parallel sentence structures wherever possible. I did not use the words prove, believe, or feel that in the manuscript. And finally, I had 2 to 3 colleagues or peers in the lab review my paper and integrated many of their suggestions into it. Next, the checklist provides several reminders for each specific section of the paper. This, of course, begins with the title page. These reminders include: I made sure that the title of my paper reflected my original big question and the findings of the study. I made the title as interesting as possible. I checked with all the co-authors about their correct affiliations. I acknowledged funding for the study according to the grant's guidelines, if applicable. And I confirmed that all the sentences in my manuscript were direct and concise. Next, you will see reminders for the introduction section, including: I explicitly addressed what's the question, why is the study important, and what's new. Any reader could find and circle the What's the question section of my paper. Any reader could find and circle the Why is it important section of my paper. And finally, any reader could find and circle the What is new section of my paper. There is one reminder listed for the discussion section, which is: I highlighted my study's limitations within the discussion section of the paper. The reminders for the reference section include: I checked that the references cited in the manuscript were listed in the reference section. I checked that all references in the reference section were cited in the manuscript, and I confirmed that the numbers of the references listed corresponded to the ones cited in the text, if applicable. On page 146 of Doing Developmental Research, you will then find the reminders regarding the figures included in your manuscript. These include: I have included readily understandable figure captions. I included all my figures and graphs. I properly labeled the X and Y axes on my graph. I confirmed that the labels for the X and Y axes correspond to the figure captions. I included standard error bars if required. I confirmed that my graphs and figures correspond with the data that I presented in the results section of the manuscript. I made graphs that were clear and easy to read, and the formatting of my graphs were consistent throughout the paper. I used figures and images to help the reader through the manuscript. Finally, the checklist ends with 3 miscellaneous reminders, which include: I checked with all my collaborators that they wished to be included as authors before I submitted the manuscript. I let the authors know that I submitted the manuscript and kept them informed when reviews and comments arrived from the editor. I asked my co-authors whether they wanted to be sent a copy of the submitted version of the manuscript. Next, let's look at a sample APA paper together. Download the paper titled APA Error Module Sample Paper and see if you can locate the 20 mistakes placed throughout the paper. When you are finished, play the rest of this module to find out if you correctly identified the errors within the paper. Now that you have attempted to locate the errors, let's identify them together. First, the words running head are missing from the title page. Next, the word infant on page 2 should be plural rather than singular. On page 3, the citation for Omen 2005 is found within the text but is missing from the reference page. On the second paragraph on the same page, the word referencing is misspelled. On page 5, in the second paragraph, the word Q is misspelled. Next, on page 6, the heading for the Materials and Methods section should be centered rather than left aligned. On the same page, the word stimulus is misspelled. On page 7, the word include should be written in past tense rather than in present tense. Next, the heading for the results section on page 8 should be bolded. On the top of page 9, the word condition is misspelled. On page 11, another reference is found within the text that is not found within the reference page. Additionally, on page 12, a third reference is found that is included within the text but is not found within the reference page. Also, in the next sentence, the word ontogeny is misspelled. On page 14, one of the references has a volume number that is not italicized as it should be. On page 15, there is a reference listed that is not found within the text of the manuscript. In another reference on the same page, the word "and" is spelled out between the last 2 authors of the citation. Instead, an ampersand sign should be used. Next, on page 16, the year 2005 should not be italicized. On page 17, a comma was placed between the year of publication and the title of an article being referenced. Instead, a period should be used. Finally, there are 2 references that are listed here again that are not found within the text of the manuscript. Next, watch the APA rubric module to see how these mistakes would have affected the writer's grade in this course.